Thanks for staying with us. Joe Biden may be the president-elect of the United States, but there's still a long way to go until his expected inauguration in January next year. A lot can still happen. Now, transition teams will use that time to prepare a handover from the Trump-Pence administration. A person with first-hand knowledge of that process is Grant Harris, who was part of the Obama-Biden transition team years ago. And he joins us now live from Palo Alto in California's Silicon Valley. Grant, thank you so much for joining us this morning, South African time, and evening where you are on the West Coast. Now, the dust had hardly settled on the declaration that Joe Biden had garnered enough electoral college votes to win the presidency, and already the word transition is sneaking into the narrative that we are coming out of the U.S. Your two stints working in the White House included being part of that Obama-Biden transition team. What did that entail? And would the wheels of a similar process now already be in motion for the Biden-Harris transition?
Yes, the wheels are underway. It now is a transition. And quietly, according to U.S. law, as is the standard practice, a transition team had already been set up, thinking about what a handover would look like, what prioritized policies would be pursued, and how. And this transition team really kicks into gear now that President-elect Biden has been declared the winner of the election. And this transition team will grow in size over the coming days. It is given some office space by the U.S. government. It is given funding. And their modus operandi is to understand the staffing of different agencies, the policies in place, and to think about President-elect Biden's agenda and how it can be pursued.
What do you remember about that time? I'm assuming the Obama-Biden transition period would have been probably a little bit lighter, if I can't come up with a better word, or a little bit more exciting than what we're seeing unfold in and around Washington, D.C. right now, and especially out of the White House?
Things are definitely exciting here in the U.S., and we've seen over the course of today, as the major media networks were calling the election, there was a lot of spontaneous celebration out in the streets in a lot of U.S. cities. And for the transition team, and from that perspective, President-elect Biden doesn't have any time to waste. Today is a day of celebration, but now the real work begins. And that's what he has said, and that's what the vice president-elect has said as well. He's already announced that he's going to be creating a coronavirus task force. He's going to announce the membership on Monday. He's been meeting with his economic advisors, with health advisors over the last couple of days. This is something that needs to hit the ground running in normal times, but in COVID-19, with a pandemic, with economic problems, and with all the challenges facing the country, now in particular, there's no time to waste in getting the transition going so that he can be prepared to govern from day one.
Now, peaceful and smooth transition of power has always been something that Americans have prided themselves on. Do we have any precedent for what would or could happen if President Trump sticks to his guns, or his tweets, as it were, and refuses to concede?
President Trump is unprecedented across the board. He has really shattered a lot of norms. The thing to remember, though, is that a concession speech is very much an American tradition. It's something that I personally think is very valuable and important. It's not legally required. It has no legal force. His lack of a concession, if he refuses to concede, will not affect President-elect Biden's planning. It will not affect the transition. It will not affect President-elect Biden from taking office on January 20th, which is the date that is set out in our laws in which the handover will take place. And so I prefer strongly to have a sitting president give that concession, acknowledge what has happened, and call for unity. And that's been a signature of American politics in this modern age. But I don't know what to expect from President Trump. All indications are that he's not going to be giving that. I hope that he comes around. It seems unlikely.
Now, you served as a senior director for African Affairs at the National Security Council during Obama's administration, and as counselor to Susan E. Harris, who was the ambassador to the UN at the time. How do you think the last 4 years has impacted on the U.S.'s stature as an influential voice in world security and diplomacy?
I think that our moral authority and our standing in the world has taken an enormous hit in the last 4 years, and deservedly so, given how the Trump administration has comported itself on the world stage. And actually, polling shows this, surveys show this as well, that the U.S. is held in lower regard than it was 4 years ago, and it's quite troubling to me. I think that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are going to do a great job reversing this decline. They're going to be a steady hand at the wheel, much more predictable and consistent in abiding by U.S. values, in working with allies and partners. They won't have the characteristic lack of dignity or discriminatory practices that President Trump has really embraced and that characterized much of his presidency. I think that the U.S. world standing is going to be on the up and up, and I think that we've got to rebuild some bridges.
Importantly so. What do we know? I mean, foreign policy and work in across the borders of America has been a big part of Joe Biden's career. Firstly, just as a career politician over the years and decades, as it were, but then also as vice president under Barack Obama. What do you think will be their first responsibility going forward? Repairing bridges just being one of them, and especially with an eye on relationship with Africa.
Absolutely. Repairing bridges, to be sure. The top priority is going to be getting this pandemic under control. It's surging here in the United States. About 230,000 Americans have died from the disease. The response was completely botched and politicized by the Trump administration. The first thing that President-elect Biden will need to do in taking office is get this policy right and start tamping down that disease and figuring out the economic fallout as well. So there's a lot of rebuilding to do at home. And then in terms of international relationships and repairing what many of those have looked like, there's going to be a lot of repairing relationships with allies in particular who were offended by Trump's tactics, who found him a difficult partner to work with. And then I hope, particularly in working with African partners, I think that we will see, I'm confident that we will see a president who more deeply understands the importance of strong relationships with African states. Joe Biden knows from decades of experience how important these relationships are to U.S. national security, to global leadership, and that all of the issues that he cares about, climate change and economic growth and development, that all of these require strong relationships with African states.
And indeed, it will make a difference to have a president who can actually pronounce the names of some of the countries here in Africa. Just in a closing, Grant, President Obama entrusted Joe Biden with some very serious assignments during their time in office. The vice president's office during that time wasn't just there to cut proverbial ribbons, as we've seen in some situations or some administrations in the past. Do you get the sense that there'll be a similar approach to the type of role that Vice President-elect Kamala Harris could play in this next administration?
I believe so. She is eminently qualified for the role, and she's ready to go. President-elect Biden has said that this is going to be a really important relationship. He, of course, has served as vice president in a role, as you said, where he was given massive responsibility. And there is so much on the plate for the United States right now that he's going to need to rely heavily on her. And I think that he had that in mind in choosing her. That's my own view. And so it is a deeply qualified and strong team. I think that they're going to achieve a lot.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning. That's Grant Harris, U.S. Africa expert, live for us out of California.